The first European country to invade and conquer and colonize in the New World was Spain. And very early on in the 1500s, there were conquests in Mexico and in Peru and other sections of the Andes Mountains. Uh, in the Andes, you had the Inca Empire, and in Mexico, you had the Aztec Empire. And these were very advanced civilizations that had great cities and great wealth, and a lot of gold and silver. And that was something that the Spanish conquistadors uh, lusted after, and the countries that they were from, the elites in those countries, wanted that gold and that silver, which they identified with great wealth. And the first English colonists who came to the New World were also hoping to find treasure such as that, gold and so on. The first successful colony, and it wasn't successful initially and it almost went out of existence, but it was finally established, was in Virginia, the Virginia colony. And what the English there found was not gold, but they found a certain weed, a certain plant that the Indians liked, and that they found they could turn into a commodity to market throughout Europe. And since it was addictive, people really in Europe got addicted to it, and it was enjoyed tremendously among more and more people, and that's tobacco. That's why the Virginia colony sometimes has been called the colony that was built on smoke. Um, I worked as a tobacco worker when I was a kid. It was a summer job, and it is dirty, filthy. I would describe it more to you if we were in a classroom spending time, and I'd show you how I did it. But it's extremely dirty, filthy, and labor intensive. And English gentlemen were not interested in doing that. And they figured they had to use forced labor. Uh, they brought over slaves called indentured servants. These were white. These were Europeans. These were folks from Britain, very poor people from Britain. And if you were an indentured servant, that didn't mean that you would be a slave for all of your life. You'd be a slave or a servant for about 7 years, and then you would be freed and given a little bit of money or resources to start your life. But one problem with indentured servants and other Europeans in the Virginia colony was they were susceptible to falling ill because there were germs that they weren't used to. Um, and the conditions were very hard. So there was the Indians didn't want to be enslaved, and that some of the Virginians tried to, as they were stealing Indian land, were also trying to enslave Indians to get them to uh, be tending in the tobacco plantations, tending the crops and uh, uh, harvesting the crops. And so, well, the Indians were not interested, and this resulted in Indian wars with the Indians, in which the Indians tended to win those. So there was a truce, a treaty to prevent that a slaughter of what would have been a slaughter of the Europeans and of some Indians too. But where to get the labor? And some Dutch merchants had kidnapped some people from Africa and sold them as slaves. And so you have the development in the Virginia colony more and more of tobacco plantations worked by European indentured servants and black African slaves. Um, and this helps to shape what's going to be the social structure, not only of the Virginia colony, but other colonies in the South, where the climate was such that the climate and the geography were such that it was possible to develop plantations like this. There were other plantations in the West Indies, Jamaica, and so forth, growing sugar. People became rich from this kind of thing. Not gold, but, well, in Virginia, it was the colony built on smoke, but there were other crops to be tended and harvested and so forth in these big plantations. Um, in the next colony, it was the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And this was founded not by English gentlemen who were looking to become rich, but by religious dissenters. And the terrain also was not that good, and the religious dissenters were interested in supporting themselves. So there was a development of small farming and arts and crafts and so forth to keep the colony going. And in the northern colonies, you have a more diverse kind of economy. In the South, it's agricultural plantation economies creating commodities for the global market. In New England, and in particular Massachusetts, but then other colonies that became part of New England, there was more diversity. There was agriculture. There was an attempt to fit into the global market, the buying and selling economy, the capitalist economy that was expanding in much of the world at that time. But there was greater diversity, and the economy looked a little bit different. And if you look at this handout, you'll see some of the differences between the North and the South. And we're going to talk more about North and South. What does that mean? And what puts you in the North and what puts you in the South? But what we can see in the Southern economy is that the plantation system was dominant. There were small farmers who were not involved in plantation work. There were artisans and craftsmen and laborers in the South who weren't part of the plantations. But the big money and the dominant economic system in the South was the plantation system owned by an elite. The rich folks in the South, the really rich folks, were plantation owners, planters, who owned plantations that were worked by slave labor. There were also indentured servants, European indentured servants, but these slaves, African slaves, became slaves for life. And you had small farmers, you had artisans and craftsmen, small shopkeepers, merchants, and various other folks like that. In the North, there were some slaves, but not as many. A lot more small farmers, some indentured servants, small shopkeepers, artisans and craftsmen. Also some small manufacturing. But the big money in the North, there were merchants in the South, but the most rich folks in the North were merchants. And I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later. But let me talk about it a little bit now as well. And I assume you're looking at the handout. But the merchants were people who would say they'd have sailing vessels and they would take raw materials, agricultural produce, tobacco, various other things like that from North America, and they'd take that to Britain. And Britain was an industrializing country. The Industrial Revolution began first in Britain, and they bring over manufactured goods. They might go down to Africa and get slaves, and then come back to North America, to the southern states particularly, and also to the West Indies, Jamaica, and other places that had sugar plantations, and sell the slaves and get sugar and molasses and rum. Molasses and rum are made from sugar. And get cotton and tobacco from the South, and lumber and furs and so forth from the North, and other agricultural produce. So there was this triangular trade that the merchants who were in charge of it got very, very rich, and they were part of the upper class of the South, but especially of the North. The upper class of the South the richest people were plantation owners. So I've talked a bit about the social structure in the North and in the South and the differences in the economy. And we're going to see how this, in some ways, helps to lead to the American Revolution and then later to the American Civil War.